Welcome to Hippo Brain. Hippo Brain is where we have hippo-sized conversations with people who have hippo-sized brains. These are people who we've met, we've encountered, and we've had the privilege of knowing. And this is a long format conversation. So sit down, relax, grab a cup of coffee, and enjoy the ride while we speak to some of the best brains that we've had the privilege of meeting. Today, we're going to talk to Gitansh. I've known him for some time now, and he's, I can say, a good friend, and he gives me an insight into the mind of a startup entrepreneur. I wouldn't say too much more about him, but Gitansh is currently the founder of Rento Mojo. I use the word currently, and you will know why. And over to you, Rajesh.
Thanks, Jamit. Welcome to Hippo Brain, Gitansh.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And we'll start with your journey. It's a fascinating journey. You're one of those young entrepreneurs who run a successful startup, but it's been an adventurous path for you. You grew up in Raipur, Chhattisgarh, then IIT Madras. You did mechanical and you did finance, which is a combo which you rarely get to see. Then multiple companies you worked with, 2 startups in a flurry, a few years, and then to Rento Mojo. We'll start with your initial journey, and we'll talk about how you got to Rento Mojo.
No, absolutely. We briefly discussed that. So I come from a very small town, Bhilai, that's in Chhattisgarh. Typically, a town it's pretty much set up by Bhilai Steel Plant. So so you'll see a lot of those typical middle class towns where either somebody becomes a doctor or engineer. So my mom's a doctor, my father's an engineer, my brother is possibly the white sheep in the family, and I was the black one. He was always the topper, and he then graduated from IIT Bombay, and then that, I guess, paved the way for me as well. In terms of engineering, because I was looking at my mother's just the professional life, and it was too stressful managing the kids. I don't know how she did that. She did a fabulous job managing us, the family, and also the kind of a hectic job of doctors. And one is realizing in the COVID times a lot more better now. So I definitely chose the less stressful path of engineering, and I got into IIT Madras to study mechanical there. I wanted to join some other city like Bombay or something like that, where my brother was, because I don't know. I mean, it seemed to me a little more glamorous. The small town boy coming out of small town wanted to get into a little more glamorous city, although Chennai is pretty good in itself. So I actually studied for, I was a dual degree guy. But not the most sharpest guy there in terms of studies, because I was doing most extracurricular most of the time. I was pretty much into music. I led choreo for my hostel for 5 years straight. So I think most of the extracurricular activities rather than studying. So that, I think, before the placements, that's why before the placements I had to stand out, in front of the others who were 8-pointers and 9-pointers. So I think in those days, CFA was not that famous, and my brother had already cleared, I think, by that time, level 2. And I was having because of the courses like economics and all that, and definitely I'd started a few ventures of my own within my college time as well. So I don't know. I mean, that kind of side of things in finance, and specifically the business finance of things, really fascinated me quite a lot. And I think I was one of the only few who would have given CFA back in those days, 2010s. And I sort of cleared level 1 before my placements, and which really helped me. In my placement times, I landed a job in KPMG, worked there for a little while, but I think I was not meant for it. I could survive for 3 to 4 months. I still have some good leaders and friends and colleagues from there, but I think just the whole setup was not meant for me, and I kind of jumped out within 3 months period. At that point of time, that's when the entire Startup India story was beginning, with Flipkart recently raising a pretty huge round. I think a Series A or B happened from Axel at that point of time. So I joined. I think it was only about a 300, 400 people team at that point in time, still relatively new, versus 5,000, 10,000 that they would be having at this point in time. So I was there for 3 to 4 months. I got a good understanding and got a good experience on the product side of things. But while I was at KPMG, I already was struck with the seed in my head that what my next venture would be. Because while I was a consultant in that kind of a setup where most of the ideas, it was very difficult to push the idea forward and just execute it in a large MNC at the end of the day. So, but whatever clients that I was getting, whatever complex problems that was thrown upon us, being a fresher, I didn't know much about it. So I used to, being a consultant, I used to consult several people who are in the domain, and I used to go to them with those problem statements and consult them, take the answers and responses, and go back and try and solve the problem of the client. Essentially, I thought, if every other project I'm actually taking a scenario like this, why not build a platform where essentially you can reach out, you can imagine a single sign-on from a LinkedIn, etc., where you are able to drag on most of the profile or the journey of the professional altogether, and slowly and gradually you can book calendars with each other, either on a webcam session like this, or essentially over a phone call. So that was the first venture. While getting good product experience from Flipkart, I thought possibly I can use those learnings into an actual execution of the product. And that's how I started my first venture. It was called Click to Skill. It was essentially a platform where two individuals can book each other for expert consulting sessions. That was the first one. But yeah, I think I was more of a tech and product guy to begin with. I think I started off from a small room, got some bit of angel capital. I expanded the team to about 7 to 9, 10 people. Went to a proper office and then scaled back. I mean, saw the journey of its coming down as well at the same time. In hindsight, I think one of the most enriching experiences at the time, where some of my friends were taking very high salary jobs. At the end of the day, I was still trying to struggle in 5,000 rupees a month, but it was a very enriching experience. I think we built a pretty good product, but I think some of the things we lagged did well on the product side, but we lagged on the sales and the marketing side. I think just the focus in hindsight over the actual getting a good amount of revenue and building the good story of unit economics and all that was not there, and hence the scale was not there. We couldn't scale it up pretty well. So it was a good 1.5 years of journey, and we were not making a lot of revenue, but and essentially we were bringing in people like what I was at that point in time, possibly somebody who's 3 to 4 years of experience into his professional life. We were bringing in those kind of people as experts. And definitely when their profiles were coming up, that was not very, very exciting for the folks to actually latch on and start giving some sort of a revenue for the sessions. So essentially what we started bringing in, and at that point in time, I took some capital from an angel investor, and his friend was of the likes of B.V. Jagdish, and Sun Microsystems. He sold Citrix. So consulted a bunch of people at that point in time, and I was trying to get folks of that stature to actually come on the platform and deliver a workshop. But one of the problem statements that I was facing there was that those guys didn't want to come for 10,000 rupees or 5,000 rupees a session. It would have been peanuts for them. So I kind of turned the equation towards saying that why don't you give the proceeds of the session to a charity of your cause? That might make sense. And that's where I think the pivot happened from my first venture to the second one, because we did see some sort of attraction going on in this one, that we were able to bring in a lot of people, get them deliver workshops, and the proceeds started going to a charity of their cause. And that piqued my interest in the NGO space. And while I started exploring a lot there, and I'm still fairly excited, I still don't think India has reached the right GDP per capita to, ensure that, we'll start seeing a huge market with respect to the NGO as an industry. But that's something that's fairly close to me. And, I tried to get into that with all my heart. And while I researched more and more, I got in touch with a couple of, folks, those who were actually building some good products in this industry. Apart from Keto and Wishberg and a couple of those who were there in 2013, I actually got and joined hands with Siddharth, who was owner for Web Chutney at that point in time. Fabulous guy. Always loved working with him. So he brought me into this concept that, why don't you join in? You're already trying to work around in the NGO space. Why don't you join in? What we're trying to essentially do is bring in some sort of a capital allocation from the CSR budgets of the companies and trying to fund a bunch of NGOs. And we're trying to build a very nice product there. We actually, I found that exciting because India CSR space was still fairly huge. A decent amount of capital could have been brought from there. But what we realized was that CSR as a concept within an organization is fairly confused. Nobody is able to make a decision on how much. I didn't see that people had the decision-making capability to actually say, okay, let me invest 1 crore or even a 50 lakhs or maybe a couple of lakhs itself. We pivoted, and I think that was a very interesting pivot that we started. We were getting a good traction on the platform at that point in time. With the kind of stories and beautiful merchandising that we were doing at that point in time of the videos and the stories, we went around a bunch of NGOs which were solving problems for abandoned girls, abandoned babies, acid attack victims. I, in fact, met I met the lady behind that Deepika Padukone movie. It was fabulous to, meet them and just listen to their journey and document it. And we were getting a good traction. We started turning that traction and started going to, branding and the marketing divisions of the companies and said that we can create this into a very good ripple effect or a network effect where you want traction, you want CPCs at the end of the day. We'll be able to get you that. We can get you impressions in CPC. People will be, because just the way story is created, people would be sharing that a lot on their social media platforms and elsewhere. For every share, why don't you start, giving in 1-2 rupees or 3 rupees, right? For every like, you start giving a couple of bucks. And for every donation that the consumer is doing, why don't you match it up or double it? That's that. So you will essentially be championing the cause. You will get a lot of hits, which you can, possibly create for brand awareness. And we used to align stories like that as well. Like a computer lab, NGO solving computer lab for street children would get aligned with Google. It can't get aligned with the Make My Trip. So, so that's what we started doing. It was very interesting at that point in time. We were able to bring in Make My Trip, Vodafone, Google, a couple of these companies to start the, dialogues with us. And was a very interesting one. In fact, within the 4 to 5 months of starting up, we, already there was a large organization who wanted to, buy it out, for, I think $1 million or so. At that point in time, I think Siddharth and everyone felt that it will be too early, and everyone was seemingly, they wanted to pursue continuing. At that point in time, I couldn't imagine that the depth of the market is there for this to become a really, big organization. And I was still possibly, maybe 23, 24 at that point in time. And I thought that, this will, by the time I turn, let's say 35 or so, I don't see this becoming $1 billion one. More materialistic at that point in time, but I took the jump out. And, that's when I started Pepperfry. I joined Pepperfry and I started, selling furniture and appliances there. I was building that from scratch. The category at Pepperfry, I was trying to build that from scratch. So fairly long story. Do you have anything in between, or should I just continue to Rent2Mojo from here?
No, fascinating listening to you. I think we'll get to the Rent2Mojo bit, but
Sure.
We'd love to know more. So essentially, you were doing all of these ventures,
right?
Okay, so So it's really, it must not have been easy, in the sense that two startups where you spend, two work experiences, KPMG and then Flipkart, short times there, and then two startups, things not working out for both,
Right.
then Pepperfry,
Right.
and somewhere you go out and start Rentomojo. How did
Okay.
where did that idea come from?
No, idea came from, because when I joined KPMG, so ideas keeps coming. I mean, I think that's going to be a problem for all of us. Most of the people who would have ventured out or started, there are small bursts of ideas. There's a problem statement that is thrown at us. I mean, everyone I've seen in the entrepreneur circuit, or anybody who has the problem solving bend, would try and solve it, and that suddenly becomes a seed that you would want to work on. And the maturity of the seed only becomes better as you go forward, once you start making a bunch of mistakes. So I think that was there since the college days. But specifically, for Rentomojo, when I was at KPMG, I remember my first salary was around 25,000 rupees, and I had to borrow, till my neck out from my friends and families to even furnish my apartment. So I think it was my first job, and I wanted to actually make it beautiful. I spent around lakh point five in terms of buying everything or putting it all together, which in hindsight was one of the worst mistakes that I did, because within 15 months I had to shift to a new city altogether, and just the carrying cost of all those products would have been close to about 30 to 35,000 rupees. So it just, I felt it doesn't make sense. I mean, for something that I've bought for and spending 20 to 30% of that value in terms of just relocation. So I tried to sell off a few products there and there, and you won't believe, a second-hand product is a second-hand product. Whether it's 2 months old or a 6 months old or a 15 months old, it doesn't matter. So what I mean to say is, the moment it's a second-hand, the value that people typically associate with it is peanuts. So even possibly a 15,000 rupees fridge will go for 2,000 rupees, because they make their own margins. When they'll be selling it to a consumer, they'll typically want to make at least a 5,000 rupees, which is 30% or so. And they want to make a 20, 25, 30% margin. So essentially they'll be selling it at 3,500 or 4,000 rupees at max, which is nothing, in front of, the cost that you typically spend in terms of buying it. So I had that bad experience of selling it at peanuts. I had that bad experience of packaging, repackaging, and essentially going there to Bombay, spending a great amount of deal in terms of whatever important essentials or products that I had. So I thought, this time I'm not going to buy anything. So incidentally, when I joined Pepperfry, I was, the bad ill effects that I faced with furniture and appliances, I was responsible for leading that category as well at the same time. I was able to quickly see a parallel that what kind of consumers are coming here. Typically, the consumers who were coming, in terms of buying proposition, and specifically because of Flipkart and Pepperfry, I was able to relate. These were folks, those who had the capital, that 1.5%, of the pyramid, who's possibly 30, 40, 50,000 rupees plus, 35 years plus. Those settled guys, those who are living in their own house, typically. Those were the ones who were buying products, and of course there was some section of the people, those who were looking out for affordability, and hence was getting drawn towards EMI. But I felt there was a lack or a void of a solution for folks like me. When I say folks like me, in the sense, those who were paranoid about migration, or possibly that's what my father says, that your generation is completely gone, because typically folks in my circle were moving every 2 years. Gone were the days where people were sticking around for one company for 5 to 6 years. I know, I mean, in some positions people still do that, and that's a good mark of somebody's great journey. But I still feel, I think most of the people in the organization, and that's more of a supply and demand as well. I mean, India, barring this year and possibly the next couple of years from now on, but at least we've been having a good run of at least a 5 to 6% growth year on year with respect to GDP. So which brought in a great amount, specifically after 91, 92, there has been a great amount of new industries that has cropped up in India, and hence there was a lot of demand for these, there were a lot of jobs that got created. And of course, the cities didn't have the latent demand to capture them. So, hence the migration from tier 2, tier 3 cities, and because of the colleges, there were that essentially, I believe, started causing that migration, and that's where we are. That now, even now, there are so much of latent, the demand for the jobs were fairly higher in this kind of a growth period. The demand for the jobs were higher than essentially the supply, and hence people, if somebody wants to grow faster, they'll typically change jobs every 2.5 years. Cutting story short, I felt that in my small subset of a small network itself, I was seeing people are pretty much changing jobs every 3 years or so. So I felt it doesn't make sense. Buying doesn't make sense for folks like us. And specifically when I looked at the cohort, all of us, because of that reason of migration, were not staying in our own apartment. And there were other contours, macro contours to it as well. That today, if you're getting a interest at 6 to 7% and your rental yields are 2 to 3%, it doesn't make sense to buy as well. I mean, you'll keep on paying for a house for 20 years unless and until you're looking out for a capital appreciation. But I think gone are those days as well. I think the biggest bump happened between 1990s to 2000 till 2007 or 8 when the entire thing went bust. But so having said that, the new generation was not buying, and hence that is resulting in the kind of with the real estate buying going down, the rental real estate actually picking up a little bit. So I thought this can be a good proposition for all the folks those who are living in rental apartments and typically looking out for a short-term period, because it amazed me the thing for a while that there is no solution if I don't want to buy. There is practically every other solution if I want to buy and want to buy it cheap, want to buy it on monthly installments, but there is no solution for somebody who wants it only for a right economical solution for somebody who doesn't want to buy. Right now, I'm looking out for a short-term period. And when I say short, it's typically people used to associate rental with 1 day rental or 2 days rental or 3 days event rentals and all of that. I never felt rental, that definition of rental is something that I wanted to create as a solution. What I was talking about, a monthly installment, but you for a short-term period, not for a 1 to 2 months or a very short-term period in which the need. I was talking about a lifestyle change that you keep, possibly the new place that you go, the products move along with you, or you can change the products every couple of years, etc., etc. So short-term needs of products for about a 14 to 15 months, monthly installment, more financing sort of structure is what I thought can really help, a guy like me. And when I looked at the economics, I was blown because being at Pepperfry, I had the luxury of at least, or not just Pepperfry, at Flipkart and being associated with all these retail companies, I knew what are the margin structures, and I felt retail is it's superior in terms of the margin structures altogether, because you're essentially rotating the same product from consumer to consumer, because it's 14 months of chunks of usable period with one consumer to the other, and there's a large usable life. You can actually build very highly profitable companies out of this. So just I think that same business finance or that whole I think lens really helped me to understand that this business has very superior profitability and metrics. When I compared the buying aspect and the business aspect of things, that and the consumer need for using it for 15 to 20 months, when I kind of mixed all of that, I felt it was a no-brainer to start off.
So essentially what you were doing was converting rent into an EMI effectively, or a purchase decision, the gap that is there between say 3 days and 3 years, that sweet spot in between, and you're making it sort of into an EMI payment for the furniture for the time you're using it.
Yeah, EMI payment, but EMI is still something which doesn't give you that flexibility as a user, which is a migratory user like me. I'm using migratory, but it's more like a lifestyle choice, which is the new age folks were looking at, because there is no certainty. I would be changing my job, changing my house. I'll be going back to a new job and possibly a house which is closer to it, etc., etc. Because of those uncertainties, EMI is still a fixed nature. Irrespective of what happens to my life, I'll have to keep paying that EMI. So I wanted to mix that good quality of an EMI and give it to a user who's not looking to buy, who doesn't want to buy altogether. His option is EMI, but he's not looking. Our kind of consumers don't look to buy. It's not pretty much a buying versus EMI decision. Otherwise, I think if somebody is looking out for the 3 to 4 years, rental will never make sense.
So
But
it's the ability to call it off. I mean, if I'm migrating, then I can end it, go to another place and do the Rento Mojo again. That's really what you are offering.
there is a cost of freedom. I mean, there is a cost of flexibility that most of the people, try and chase these days, right? And that's why you are happy spending a 5,000 to 6,000 rupees, let's say in a Ola and Uber, going on multiple rides. I mean, some of the business, if you are constantly traveling, that's the kind of amount that you anyway should spend. So the cost that might be expensive at times. I mean, people are calling out for Coca-Cola bottles from downstairs, and they are paying around 150 bucks dunzo for it. So that's the kind of a cost that you pay for convenience and freedom, right? And that's what it is. I mean, the cost to get out. I mean, the feeling of being free, that I don't have to deal with these hassles, is something which is very powerful and will be more powerful as we go forward.
So fundamentally, you're saying EMI with immense flexibility.
Yeah.
So over a period of time, when you set up Rento Mojo, what are the kind of consumers that you've seen coming? Is it the migratory versus the ones who want to keep upgrading their lifestyle, or those who want to get out? And what are the average kind of holding periods that you're looking at? And what is the consumer behavior that you see?
No, so the consumers are definitely the ones, those who are, as I said, who are living in rental apartments. That's like, because if you're living with your parents, or if you're living in your own apartment, if you're living in your own apartment and not with the parents, that means you're definitely that 0.5. It's not that we didn't have, consumers like that. There are a lot of consumers like that also wants to upgrade, and just for because their mom is coming for a 3 to 4, 6 months period, they'll typically go for a short-term rental, etc. But I'm talking about the core consumer that we have is the guy who's staying in a rental apartment. They typically have a visibility of staying in that one place because the contract with the landlord is for typically 12 months or so. So that's the kind of a range that somebody is looking at. Okay, 12 mahine to main rehne wala hu. Let me evaluate a solution for that period. You can get a furnished house also. I mean, and that's going to be the more easier route to go for. So that's the kind of a consumer set that we have. And it's people associate that with possibly folks in the early phases of their career, but the entire range of consumers that we have is between 20 to 40. So people those who are and the average is somewhere between 28 to 30. So the average is not around 22, 23 or 24. It's slowly and gradually a lifestyle. I think people start settling. I mean, that's my view. People start settling once they have a kid. I think that's when you want to make, you don't want to keep moving places, and you pretty much settle down in one place. But there are two kind of, why this lifestyle choice helps even a consumer who's reached, let's say a 35, 34, is that migration need not always happen outside the city. That, you're possibly the new job can happen within the city, but a little relatively, far, further from where you are currently at. So essentially, and because of the entire, traffic jams and crowd, people don't want to commute. I mean, that's one of the biggest problem statements I think, as a society we'll have to solve, the traffic jams. But, in the absence of that, people try and shift to a closer place to their office. And that's what causes the migration within the cities as well. Even if somebody is stable and sticking around for a relatively longer. So hence, for all of those reasons, essentially a flexible, ownership solution like this really is helpful to a consumer bracket in that kind of age group and income group that I'm talking about.
So Gitansh, once innovation was really on the rental side with this flexibility which you talked about.
Right.
I think the second innovation that you really brought into the business was the way you financed it all.
Right.
And I think it'd be great to talk about that. The whole, I think, how you started, and you've now got a great set of investors on board. Right. What was that journey?
So, I remember, I mean, the first capital that I raised was, again, we put in some capital from our own pockets, but slowly and gradually, whoever was joining the team at that point in time was coming up with a couple of lakhs. So that's how we were funding it. Because the demand was coming up, that capital was just getting vanished in no time. That's when I had to turn to my brother as well. He had already kind of burnt his fingers by funding my earlier startup, but kudos to him and my mother again to take a chance at me. So they funded me back in those days once again. That okay, take some more equity. Take some more capital and fund it into the business. Essentially, we were buying all these assets from equity, which was not a sustainable way to do. We were seeing the deadline to, we were seeing the deadlock to happen pretty soon. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons rental never became a mainstream, because the rental was never taken in the way we started looking, which I'll tell now. That it was always a local phenomena for this reason, because you can't keep funding it through your own pocket. It's just unscalable. The closest, I'll talk about the incidents first, and then the proxy to what kind of industry we started, kind of thinking that we're similar to that industry. But I'll talk about the incidents first. That when we ran out of capital, but we were we kept on raising the POs, purchase orders, for buying more and more furniture. I still remember there was a nice guy called Irshad Bhai in Thirni Road in Bombay. That's the guy that we were working with and constantly raising POs for furniture. When we ran out of capital, we still had close to about 10 to 15 lakhs that we were supposed to pay him. And that 10 lakhs or 5 lakhs, pardon me for that, I might not remember off my head, but it was some amount, 5 to 10 lakhs easily. And when he was knocking us again and again that where is my money at the end of the day. Very, very gentle guy, very nice guy. He apparently ended up giving us a good amount of credit for 1.5 months. But when we ran out of all the options, we actually made it sound like that we have a lot of business coming in, but we want you to convert your 5 to 10 lakhs so that we'll keep paying you from your rentals. That just happened in a conversation. It was not supposed to be a business model. That just happened because we had already seen a deadlock, and I don't know what to do. Me and my partner at that point in time, Ajay, we were just debating with this guy, and we thought this can be a good one. Even if he gives a 10 lakh, we'll start giving him let's say 60,000-70,000 rupees out of the rental that we were generating. In that point in time, I think we had given close to about 20 lakhs of worth of assets in the market already. So whatever rental that we were generating, we thought possibly a good portion of it, whatever yields we were generating, I'm not going to get into what kind of yields we were generating, maximum, humongous yields, but a fraction of that is what we started giving him. And I remember the first time he received a check from our side, the next month, we felt that we have made a business model out of this. That this kind of a monthly stream, that fixed coupon is, I think, is the biggest market in India. The debt market is possibly the biggest in the capital market if you look at. And that's the most secure. That everyone looks for a stable stream of cash flows to be coming to them on a regular basis so that they can keep funding working capital. There can be multiple reasons why somebody would want to get a fixed coupon back. So this guy got into that, and slowly and gradually, every other PO, if we were raising for $100, typically 30 to 40% of that started getting in this kind of a way. That okay, we're not going to pay you, we'll keep paying you through the rentals. And he was fairly happy as well, that because of the margins that he was making at that point in time, he was not able to just keep funding the working capital, and he was making a certain degree of investment into our company. And because it was good, he was a very small vendor when he started working with us, and he was growing with us. So I think we needed him, he needed us at that point in time, and I think it worked out pretty well. But that set the business model for us, and we took that same opportunity and his repayment history, and we started reaching to a bunch of Marwadis in my brother's network, and we got a bunch of HNIs, then giving that 5 to 10 lakhs and 20 lakhs in no time. We knew how to fund these assets at the end of the day, but we didn't know how difficult it would be to scale. But there was a business model, and that kind of made everything exciting, at least to the investors, that there was because everyone knew some bit of demand will come. The only roadblock would be, I think, one of the most prominent institutional investors at that point in time that I met. The first meeting with them, they asked me how long would it take for you to go to a 10 crores and what sort of a sum will be required. I gave him a certain figure, which just seemed was that's going to be a lot of dilution. So he just felt, because at that point in time, we didn't have this business model of getting it financed. So it didn't work out. But because of this kind of model, it really worked out. People started seeing a scalable model, and that's when we got funded. But in hindsight, that's how most of the banks and lending companies and financial markets world work. Every loan that we take, it's not that people are funding you out of equity. They also, everything is borrowing at the end of the day. I think no bank today has enough capital if everyone wants to take their savings account back. It's just the trust. I mean, money is at the end of the day so everyone leverages on through the savings that we are putting into the banks today, and that lever is where a spread or something like an ROE or return on capital that you make from the business. And I started realizing that this business is all about that. And that was the point. I think we've not looked back. It's been 5 years journey, and we are constantly only unearthing the more beautiful aspects of this business as we are going forward.
It's quite interesting. So Irshad Bhai is the pivot and the reason of your model.
I'll go and thank you from the bottom of my heart one of these days. Yeah,
I know it should probably be there on your deck. This is the Irshad Bhai model of Rento Mojo.
Irshad Bhai.
Necessity is the mother of business models, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't not agree more. Absolutely. I think that's what it just, I think so, it's been said, right? I mean, it's a very difficult job at the end of the day. I think one company sees, in possibly 5 years, they see about 3 to 4 near death situations. 99 point something success rate. I'm not going to get into numbers because I don't really know what are the numbers, but many companies fail, some survive, but those who survive are only the ones who are able to cross that threshold and find a solution in that near-death situation. So I think that's what this business has become.
It's interesting. So I like what you're saying. So you at heart, you've been a product guy, you've been an engineer, and you've been a CFA. And today, where you stand, where you're actually
not
running,
a CFA, but
okay.
I didn't clear all the levels. I mean, there's apparently some 3 levels and all of that, and yeah.
That's okay. This is not Shadi.com. This is only hippobrain.com. So, when you're running your firm and when you look at it, obviously you're running a finance operation, you're running a tech operation, and at the heart of it, you're running a consumer-centric operation. So you've got product, engineering, and finance enmeshed into all 3. And that, to my mind, is a pretty unique combination when I talk to various startup founders. It's probably 1 out of the 3 most of the time. And if you're lucky, you get 2 out of the 3.
Yeah.
And you seem to show 3 on 3. But when you're running your firm and when you're talking to consumers and you're looking at insights, which part of it do you see yourself using more often? And can you share some insights on that?
No, I truly, and that's something that I've realized that at least definitely at the forefront, there will be a couple of more long-term. So there's, of course, I mean, company as it scales needs to really understand what are the verticals, main verticals of the company. What are the fundamental areas for us? Let's say it's one side getting revenue, the other side getting that leverage, in terms of the capital. Getting operations, it's a unique operation in itself. If I say, we're a mixture of e-commerce company plus a banking operations, plus a new model. That means we need to be innovative with brand also to create this lifestyle change for the consumer. So the branding angle is also fairly complex in itself. So it's a mixture of all. I won't put it that one is important over the other, only because I've seen cases where if one of the vertical is going down, no matter whatever you do, even if you have a leverage of 7 to 8 times and on, let's say 10 crores worth of equity, you are able to get 100 crores of debt from somewhere. If the revenue is not coming in tandem to that, it will all fall apart. And let's say if a lot of revenue is coming in and you're not able to get the leverage up to the same level, that means you're using a lot of equity to fund the assets and you'll get into working capital issues. That's what typically I've always seen some of the biggest banks and NBFCs only, people say that banks and NBFCs fall only because of a working capital and the ALM mismatch. I mean, the asset liability mismatch that people call. That's the only reason for the banks to fail. Otherwise, a bank is not meant to fail. So that's what. So I think one vertical over the other is going to be very difficult to choose. But but I feel when you're creating a playbook from scratch, all these things becomes quite complex because everything is new. The way we run operations for over 100,000 subscribers today is fairly new because anybody can. There is no infrastructure today that helps you come to a dashboard, hit for a relocation button, so that you go and pick those assets and then relocate to a new city. I mean, imagine the number of touch points that would happen in between. That there is no infrastructure which is helping consumers transfer the lease to a roommate. If you have a certain, let's say, 2 or 3 products, you can't, and you want to give it to a roommate. Imagine the kind of flow will happen that we'll have to verify the new user as well. There is a risk of assets, still within the same house. The new guy is about to go. We need to, close the deposit with that guy and, generate a new stream of, working relationship with the new consumer altogether. So just when you have 18 to 19 different touch points across 100,000 plus subscribers, and any other touch point can come at any point of time, people can have multiple orders. One new order for which a KYC verification is happening, and I'm possibly, doing a transfer of lease with the other one. So it's fairly, complex. So just the product and the ops infrastructure, I would say it's not, charted territory. It's very uncharted. As much as uncharted territory that leverages or the collections is or verification is. Today we use around 130 to 140 variables to verify a user, because when we started this understanding, nobody was even looking for the need to verify the user, right? Chair or sofa ke liye kaun verify karega? That used to be the normal notion, but slowly and gradually we realized that it's so important at the end of the day. I'm still taking an exposure on the user, right? So there's a, now it has become a lot more evolved understanding of what are the variables that are important to us, all the correlations, regressions, and slowly and gradually, hopefully, we'll be able to convert this into an ML model. That I think everyone says that we have an ML model, but I think most of the industry is some bit away from that. But yeah, hopefully we should be able to have an intelligent model behind it. I think we're close to it. And I hope, most of the companies also, I think the credit model also, or the bureau model is also fairly old. So that increases the complexity. That, today I'm not trying to test whether that somebody has the capability to pay me back, because at the end of the day, I'm giving assets. At the end of the day, I want my assets back. So essentially, I want the traceability of the user to be paramount. Like, you should not go vanish. You don't have money, it's okay. Give me the assets back so that I can redeploy. So traceability is more important than the traditional way of looking things from a credit perspective. So that's how the variables and some of the data points and the sets and the way that you evaluate kind of changes. So yeah, so very complex verticals. I'm thankful to God that as a team, there of course minus plus and negatives, but as a team, there's a strong team that has come together for the direction right now, and I'm fairly proud of that team.
So, Hitansh, as you look ahead, what are the challenges for scaling? I mean, you've got a very good foundational platform built. I think there's a very powerful moat that you've created with the interplay of multiple parameters. So it's very hard for someone to just come in and replicate all of those elements.
Right.
So now, what are the barriers to scaling this up many times from here?
I mean, there's I think the biggest right now, at least in the short term, is just the uncertainty of COVID altogether. I think I'm not the only business who would be facing it. Every business is getting impacted in a very different way, unless and until you have actually a positive beta with the kind of a situation, unless and until you are a net tech or a pure online. I think most of the businesses are impacted in different way. Even if you're a B2B service-led company, there are a couple of industries that you had an exposure with whose revenues are down, and hence you are getting affected. We are not getting affected because of demand or anything like that, but definitely in the short term, of course, these lockdowns. Pune is in a lockdown right now. Chennai just came out of a lockdown. any city can go into, and suddenly COVID has become an urban phenomenon. COVID is not impacting the tier 2, tier 3 cities quite a lot. It's impacting the major cities. It's Delhi, Bombay, Pune, Chennai, Bangalore. So definitely across whatever I'm hearing from the portfolio companies as well, that definitely offline companies have been impacted quite drastically. But having said that, it's a short-term thing. I understand from a long-term variable perspective. I think I don't see problems to scale, at least going from 3 to 4 times from where we are. But of course, every scale will have a different kind of a problem. I think the variables are going to be the same, just the complexity of achieving those variables, like a leverage itself, after you have crossed 1,500 crores of, let's say, assets, AUM that you have let out in the market, is going to be very different going from 1,500 crores to 3,000 crores versus, where we are to, let's say, about 800 to 900 crores. It's going to be a very, doable journey. So I think, to answer your question, I think the variables are understood now. And that's why we don't see us more as a company who has not been able to figure out a product market fit. And that's why we're in that growth phase now. I mean, and that's where possibly a growth capital comes into the company, and because the variables are known. Typically, the growth capital won't come into a company where the variables are unknown, and the problems of scale is still unknown as such.
It's interesting what you're saying, and the more I hear you, I've known you for some time, but I still every time I meet you, I understand the complexities of your business are crazy. So going forward, I say, so if I look at the levers that you're pulling, one is the supply side financing. So in terms of trying for funding to come in, then
Right.
you have the demand side financing in terms of credit risk on the individual that you are looking at.
Right.
The third is the acquisition side, to trying to get more consumers on coming in.
Right.
Fourth is a category, the kind of range of things that you can finance, as in some sense. And the fifth is the entire logistics of getting into this guy, taking it back from this guy, passing it on, refurbishing, I don't know,
Yeah.
asset management.
Yeah.
You're running on 5-6 levers.
Yeah.
Probably that's why your education across varied fields helps you. But when you're running on all these 5-6 levers and running this firm, where do you see that, okay, these are the few things I think we've tackled. These are the ones that seems to be a challenge. These are the ones that probably we need the Indian infrastructure to come up. So where do you see the challenges coming forward? Where do you see the strengths lie? And where do you think the mismatch may happen in the future?
I mean, not specifically. Specifically for our company, as I said, I'm fairly confident of the team which has come up. I know the difficult parts is, of course, for any new concept out there. And I'll go back to what Rajesh was saying, that there's enough moats in the business. Many will not come, etc., etc. But that's sort of a negative point also for the industry, which is in the initial phases. Because in the initial phases, possibly just imagine e-commerce. You have spent around they must have raised $5 to $6 billion already. Even if 10 to 20% of that goes in terms of making the e-commerce market, that's a very large sum. That is almost $1 billion has already gone into marketing to make this kind of a consumer behavior change from offline to buying online. And COVID is only helping them now. I mean, they'll be able to acquire a lot of these new first-time consumers who will be possibly getting exposed to buying online for the first time. And same with us. I mean, COVID will help us from a demand side, because there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, a lot of job losses, pay cuts. GDP per capita for the next couple of years is going to be almost shrink to 40-50%. So we are in here for a long run. I mean, whatever I hear, for the next 3 years, the recovery is not going to happen. Now, but having said that, I think I kind of derailed. You were saying that which parts of the business would be a lot more challenging as I go forward. I feel that most of the variables are well understood. There's of course some plus and minuses with respect to the experience of the people those who are running within the team today. But as a company, we know what are the problem statements that we can hit. Whatever, I mean, up to our best capacity, we know what can be a problem statement that we can possibly hit in the future. But let me tell you, for a new concept like ours, like an Airbnb or lending club or any new concept which is outside, consumer behavior change is definitely very tricky from a branding perspective. It's very, very tricky. For any, if you're just shifting a transactional behavior to one channel to the other, that still you need to educate the market with that. But if you are going for a different kind of a transaction altogether, कि कल तक बंदा ये करता था, अभी उसको बोलने नहीं आप ये करो, which is a different. So imagine there's just not a transition from buying offline to online which is happening. There is a different kind of a lifestyle behavior that rather than any of the things that you used to do, get into a furnished house or buy products from a second-hand market or buy first-hand, buy products on EMI. All those consideration sets, we are asking him to go for rental. So that in the longer run only helps when the industry increases, but that has its pros and cons. Do you want to be a larger market share of, let's say, a $2 to $3 billion opportunity, or a little less market share of a $10 to $20 billion opportunity? So the difference lies there, right? And both will have a very different approach in terms of the capital requirement and the dilution and several aspects around it. So yeah, I don't know if I'm able to.
No, I think you're making a lot of sense. In fact, one of the episodes we had was the ED at DBS Bank, and Karthik was talking about in his life he's seen customer, data, and tech. And this is now coming together as the three powerful forces that is driving change, that is driving behavior, that is driving businesses. And I see your firm and the kind of model you built is taking all of this on steroids.
Yeah.
There is data, there is tech, there is consumer, on the demand side, on the supply side, on the risk side, on the logistics sides, on the financing side.
That's the beautiful part. I mean, I really enjoy the problems that comes in this business more than any of the problem statements that I've seen so far. So that's definitely true. But being in the problem is the bad thing. Coming out of one is actually a good thing in hindsight. When you are in the problem, it's always the bad thing. Yeah.
So, Idansh, when you look back in your journey as an entrepreneur over the last 10 years, or the better part of 10 years, are there one or two defining moments sort of that have shaped your thinking, that have made you inflection points, that have made Gitansh?
I think all, as I said, and I was just speaking about it, that I think when I say a problem, it's the near-death situation that I've seen always right from the first venture. When I was not able to get out of it, there was a learning because of the hindsight that what went wrong. When I was able to get out of it, it just boosts the confidence to a different degree altogether. And sometimes it has been a bit of a stroke of luck, sometimes, but every other time that I look behind, there has been a considerable amount of stress and hard work that happens at the same time during those phases. So I think that resilience is, I've kind of started loving this word altogether, and it's, I don't know, I mean, I hope in the future one doesn't question that whether this resilience was important or not, but definitely resilience. And you would know, Rajesh, Jamit, resilience is one thing that has made you what you are at the end of the day. It's been one of the most important traits.
In fact, it's fascinating. As I was listening to your journey, when I look at the parallels with my life, I think there are amazing parallels in the early days. When I came back from the US, the first few years, I tried multiple ventures. They all failed. And then I hit upon the idea of India World. And even there, those 5 years that I ran India World till the business was acquired by SIFI.
Right.
There were so many near-death experiences. In fact, you talked about Siddharth. He spoke to me about my journey of India World after almost 20 years. No one had asked me. And there's a chapter in his book.
Right.
And when I spoke about it, when I read what he had written, I was telling my wife, I mean, we were both partners in this whole thing. And every month we were going through a near-death experience.
Whoa.
I mean, that's really the life of an entrepreneur. You have no idea how it's coming. And I see that in a lot of what you have talked about today. Fascinating journey.
Right. No, because I feel that near death also, happens because, I don't know, I mean, you went completely, there's several ways of running a business now, thankfully, because Now at least we have folks like you have already built and paved a certain degree of blueprint. At the end of the day, that ways of working is constantly changing and evolving. Like, some bootstrap businesses that I'm really fond of has done a fabulous job now, and some take up a VC capital, some pretty much take only a PE capital in the future. So I think these near-death experiences increases because of the model also. I mean, when you take a VC capital, and they also need to give up higher than marketing returns within a short period. That means there needs to be a catalyzed growth for the first 5 years. And when you're moving a ship at such a huge pace, imagine the kind of complexities of the variables. I mean, the more complex the number of variables, and you're trying to move them at 100% year on year, or 300%, let's say, year on year growth rate to satisfy that kind of IRR demands. You're bound to, reach milestones or phases like these of near death. I mean, I don't think it's inevitable. Yeah.
Great, and we'll come to Jamit's favorite questions now.
Okay. So, Gitansh, I always ask these questions and I always get very, very interesting answers. My first question is, as an entrepreneur or as a individual or as a boss, as a CEO, there must be something that ticks you off regularly, something that frustrates you. What is the biggest thing or the smallest thing that gets you irritated or frustrated all the time? What is it that you just can't handle?
I think, complacent behavior at the end of the day. I think that's something that's definitely one. And secondly, being in positions which are helpless at the end of the day. Some things which are not in a control and you just need to wait and watch it out, what's going to happen. Is definitely, these are the things where I see my sleepless nights for sure. That, because you're trying to continuously, stride and, push and, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, irrespective of the time, etc. And you are always trying to form a family at the end of the day. So I think that happens. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad or good or wrong or fair. I think every other team finds their own mojo or finds their own rhythm and a balance. Like, I was just speaking to my people's head. His name is Ketan 2 days back, and we were so happy with our last Friday's meeting that in the past 5 years I haven't seen a meeting like this in which everyone was pushy at the same time, pushing for the right intentions, and everyone was thinking company and not divisions. I think that's a very critical thing to have. That I'm not heading a certain division. Our point of view is we might be having a paths together, but we're solving for the company's problem statement. So anyway, so we found it. So I think reaching that was must have crossed a lot of times where I would have gotten tick with something or the other, but that's all with the right intention of ensuring that the family is kind of coming together. So that's been one. B, I'm sort of helpless with the things which are not in my control. These some of the things like, I don't want to go in that direction, but some of the things like lockdown and everything, I kind of question what true benefits without having a blueprint or framework of the lockdown. I think definitely as a society right now we need a blueprint and a framework which is missing. Which somebody along with the government authorities and everyone and folks, anybody who's in the influencing capacity, it's been five months. We should have a blueprint and a framework by now. Is something that is bothering me these days, at least for the past couple of days.
So I get it. You're talking more people in terms of complacency, where you see that they're just happy and they're not pushing hard enough, and that bugs you. And then obviously being helpless or waiting for something to happen, as opposed to an entrepreneur wanting to do things. I think both of them are probably the hallmarks of a great entrepreneur. And the next question is, it's another interesting one. And many times in our life, we do a lot of big things that get applauded and people thank us, or we come back and there are case studies done of it. But it's so many times I believe that there are small things that you would have done that probably never won you any award, will probably not something that you can probably brag about at some big forum, but has actually impacted the business or impacted you as an entrepreneur or impacted the firm as a whole. Probably any small innovation, small thing that you think you want to talk about that that really changed something, but साले इसमें कोई award तो नहीं मिलने वाला है.
It'll be, I don't know, what some of the innovations I spoke about, how, you know, the initial journey was.
Besides Irshad Bhai, of course. Besides Irshad Bhai, of course.
Besides, sorry?
Irshad Bhai. Irshad Bhai, God level हटा देते हैं.
That was the innovation, BAP of innovation altogether. Yeah, but other than that, something that I wasn't yet rewarded for. This is, I don't think you get rewarded for anything. You know, I think it's fairly a, you know, lonely thing at the end of the day. You know, you keep doing things at the end of the day. Every other node in the entire chain is having that role to give you that positive feedback or criticism at the end of the day, and which only shapes you better. So reward to pata nahi. I can't think of anything right now. कि रिवॉर्ड नहीं मिला और कि आई डोंट थिंक कि वो रिवॉर्ड तो मेन रिवॉर्ड तो अभी जब स्केल हो जाएगा, जब सब कुछ हो जाएगा, इन हाइंडसाइट दैट विल बी द रिवॉर्ड.
I guess so. Sometimes, yeah, as an entrepreneur, you do a lot of small things, and you just lose track, because every small thing is a step towards a big thing that you've been prepared for. Probably your finance learnings, जो आज काम आ गया, जो product learnings आज काम आ गया, जो in terms of your engineering and the tech that you're doing, काम आ गया. I think it's quite interesting. It is I'm most fascinated by your business model. I'm most fascinated by you as an individual being able to bring all these opposites together. I think what you're doing is absolutely remarkable, right, Rajesh?
No, I think for Jemit, I think it was wonderful listening to Gitansh. I think it brought back for me a lot of memories of the early days of my own entrepreneurial journey about 25 years ago. See, entrepreneurship is, you know, it's not just about this one big idea which you get and then you go and do it. It's about going to work every day. I keep saying it's about the way how you have to go to work to reduce the risk of failure every day. It's about a string of innovations, small innovations. And what Gitansh is doing, you know, across all the sort of planks that you talked about, all the levers that you talked about, is absolutely incredible. I think he's building an amazing business, which will be hard for anyone else, I think, to match. Great work, Gitansh, and all the best for your continuing journey.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rajesh, Jamie, for the time.
My big one, my absolutely big learning today was, when people join a firm, don't expect joining bonus. The people have to give joining equity to join your firm. Please come, I want you to join, and now please fund 2-3 furniture items.
Yeah. Imagine, yeah.
How did you manage that? Gitansh, ये सब company ठीक है? How did you manage to get people and tell them to now pay money to you?
Yeah, was a joining bonus to the company. No, I think again they were fascinated. I think, and I'm grateful to everyone who came in those initial days. I think everyone was just liking the newness of the business model. I think the same thing that you're feeling, I think that would have worked for them also.
Great. Thanks a lot, Gitansh. Absolutely brilliant, fascinating talking to you. You're truly a hippo brain, and we love to have people like you on the show. And for all of you, that was another brilliant conversation with an absolutely massive hippo brain. You can find us on YouTube on Hippo Brain. Please click subscribe. You'll get more and more updates on the latest people that we meet. You can find us where you find your regular podcasts, on Spotify, on Google, on your iTunes podcast, wherever you get it. And you can visit hippobrain.com. Thanks a lot. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Rajesh. Thank you, Jamie, for putting this together. Thank you. Lovely chatting with you.
Thank you, Gitansh.
All right. See you. Bye.